So I'm going to demonstrate painting the pinks of this lovely plant. So I've done my pencil drawing for this plant and I have transferred it to my good paper, and the next thing I will do is go back over this drawing, looking at my plant again and making sure that I have all of my contour details correct. And I will lift the transfer, which is very soft, so that I just have a nice fine line drawing to paint with. And then I made my protective cover sheet with the window, and you can see that I have pretty much redrawn everything, looking at my specimen again and making sure that all my edges are exactly the way I want them, the contours are correct, and now I'm ready to paint. And I've also mixed up the colors that I think I'm going to need. I did a color study, so I know that this particular pink is the one I want to use. This is my green, and that's a mix of sap green and permanent rose. This is a mix of permanent rose and scarlet lake. The stem is going to be the red mix plus sap green, only much more neutralized. So I have all of these mixes made ahead of time. I'm also going to, in some cases, put a little bit of Windsor lemon under some of the leaves, and in other cases, I'm just going to dilute the local color down for these patterns that are in the leaves themselves. I am not going to get all of this done, obviously, for this video, but what I do want to show you is kind of my approach and how to go about getting some organization in terms of extensive subject matter. All right, so basically I'm going to put a tea wash in just about everything, one way or the other. I'm going to start with just kind of filling in these stems, putting the right color into each one of them. I am just working dry. It's such a small, narrow area. This will just help me to be able to see things and not get confused by all these different lines that are falling in place here. The older stems have this kind of reddish brown look to them, and of course this is just a tea wash at this point, so it's not going to be very dark. This is just to kind of differentiate where everything needs to go before I start to work on a particular section. I've blocked in the stems to the flowers. The next thing I'm going to do is just block in some of the leaves with some light green, and that will separate my flowers from my other elements of this plant. Because some of the leaves seem to have a little bit of a yellow edge on them, I'm going to dampen my brush and add some water to this edge, and then put a little bit of lemon yellow along those edges, because for the most part this leaf has more of a cooler green cast to it, trying not to go near the pencil, because remember how yellow has a tendency to lock in your pencil, as we learned in the previous lesson. All right, the next step is to put a tea wash on all of the leaves. In this case, I have also dampened around the yellow, not going all the way in, and filling in the rest of the leaf, as I did here, with a little green tea wash, and then feathering it into the yellow along the edges where I need it. Now, in some cases, I have leaves that don't have any yellow edges, so I'm just going to put a green tea wash on all of those. All right, now we'll switch to the light green, and we'll have that section of the painting blocked in. I'm going to start by putting in some flat washes in all of the flowers, and then we'll start to work on one or two so that you can see what the progress would be. I have already pre-mixed a combination of Scarlet Lake and Permanent Rose, and thinned it out with a lot of water, so I have a nice thin wash. And I don't put too much water down because I don't want it to be too runny. So I'm just going to run a flat wash over everything because things will change. Red has a tendency to get it to be very strong. So working from the top down. And by the way, I am working on a new watercolor paper. This is a Senoyer hot press. I have never worked on it before, so I'm going to see what happens. It already looks like the paint saturates quite quickly. So if you see me quickly changing something, it's probably because I'm responding to the paper. Now I've got a lot of moisture on here, so I'm going to dry off the brush and pick up some of that puddle that I see. But once it starts to dry, don't go back into it because that's when you end up in trouble. Switch brushes. And you can see my puddle here, right? So we're just going to keep it going, keep it going. Make sure you get your edges. Do not go into this area, it's already dry. And as I say, if you've missed a little spot, leave it alone and go back to it after it's dry with just the tip of the brush and you'll be all right. So I'm going to finish filling these in and then we'll start to put in our shadows. Make sure you load your brush. Don't just dip your brush in the tip, you know. Make sure you in the beginning fill the brush so that the belly continues to feed the tip of the brush as you're working. So there we go. So now we can start thinking about where we're going to put our shadows. For the most part, we're just going to use a stronger saturation of the mix. And for the dark shadows, I'm probably going to add a little bit of neutral tint. And for the most part, I'm just going to use the red in a stronger concentration in order to get three-dimensional form on these flowers. Otherwise, I think that the reds tend to get a little muddy if you're not careful with them. All right, so before I start, there are a couple of places where I'm just going to touch up. And I can see there are a couple of edges that I missed. So I'm just going to go in and just barely touch those areas just to bring them up to the edge of the shape that they're supposed to be in. This is the time to correct so that you don't end up with patches after the fact. And some of this will even itself out. I'm going to start adding more value to certain areas and building it up more or less gradually, but in some cases we can kind of go in right away. And I'm going to dry off my brush, and this is going to be a graded tone. So I've cleaned the brush, and now I'm going to feather that color into the tip, which is a little lighter. And that's going to be true here, this whole side. So I might just dampen this edge a little bit because this is going to gradate And I'm going to start with a local color and then add a little neutral tint. So I'm putting in what I see as a shadow area. I am wetting sections of this where I know I need to do a gradation. Don't try to paint another area here until you know it's dry. Now I know that I'm going to have to add some neutral tint to this area, and I have to remember that there are some edges that have to be left very light. I'm just going to soften that just the slightest bit. This area here, we may need to mask this off so that I can paint this petal as one unit. Okay, what I've been doing in this area has just been gradually building up the color using the tea wash concentration and more or less layering in semi-dry using the side of my brush to act as though it were a pencil, and letting things dry and then going back in and adding more layers. And using the side of the brush rather than the tip of the brush so that you can get sweeping dry brush gestures, which was one of the lessons that you had in Watercolor 1. Remember, don't leave any puddles, and make sure you soften all your edges so that you don't end up with stripes. This area here, this part of the petal, I have covered with mascoid. I'm going to have to mask out that stem. So we'll let that dry. I'm going to go clean my brushes of mascoid, and I'll be back.